Good afternoon and welcome. I'm John Scanlon. I'm the chair of the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime. Great pleasure to have you all here this afternoon. Just a quick note to start with, we will be recording this event today and we will be making the recording available publicly. Our event is called Benefits of an Additional Protocol to the UNTOC, Lessons Learned from the Existing Protocols. And I'd like to pay a particular welcome to our host and co-host. Firstly, we're hosted by Angola, with the support of Peru, the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, Born Free Foundation, Wildlife Justice Commission, and the Wildlife Conservation Society. So thank you to all of them. I've been asked today to start off by providing a little bit of a context of how we've got to this discussion today. And if we go back to April 2021, that was when two presidents, the then presidents of Costa Rica and Gabon, issued a joint statement calling for a new agreement, a new protocol on combating and preventing wildlife trafficking. And that was followed shortly thereafter by statements made by the president of Angola in September 2021 and the president of Malawi in February 2022, also calling for a new international legal instrument, a protocol under the UNTOC on preventing and combating wildlife trafficking. The European Commission also expressed its support for a potential additional protocol covering wildlife trafficking, and they did that most recently in November 2022 through the revision of the EU Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking. Now, I think as you all know, in 2022, this topic entered the work of the Crime Commission here in Vienna through Resolution 31/1, and that was originally submitted by Angola, Peru, and Kenya. And that resolution invited member states to the UN Office of Drugs and Crime to express their views on possible responses, including on an additional protocol under the UNTOC, to address any gaps that may exist in the current international legal framework to prevent and combat illicit trafficking in wildlife. And that resolution was adopted by consensus and attracted another 12 co-sponsors, namely Colombia, Ecuador, Egypt, Gabon, Ghana, Honduras, Malawi, Morocco, Mozambique, Paraguay, the Philippines, and the United States. Now, between February and December of 2023, the UNODC collected the views of member states, and there were responses from 76 states together with the European Union. And the UNODC has compiled and analysed that, and just on Wednesday of this week, UNODC presented its analysis, and we can see colleagues from UNODC here today who presented that analysis to plenary. Amongst other things, the report reveals that more than half of the respondents have a positive view of a potential additional protocol to the UNTOC on preventing and combating wildlife trafficking. And according to these states, a global agreement on this important topic could support states in strengthening capacities to prevent and combat illicit trafficking in wildlife, developing the appropriate legislation, and improving international and national cooperation and coordination. It's important to note that several states, in expressing their support, also noted that such a protocol could potentially be extended to include other crimes that affect the environment. And we extend our gratitude to all member states who submitted their views and took the time to share a lot of really valuable insights. We are doing some further analysis of those insights because there's so much valuable information there. We will be presenting a report capturing some of that in June. As you know, there are already 3 protocols to the UNTOC, and the UNTOC itself makes provision for additional protocols to be adopted. And today's side event is aimed to answer a frequently asked question as we discuss the merits of the potential additional protocol under the UNTOC on wildlife trafficking, or covering a broader suite of crimes that affect the environment. What has been the impact of the existing protocols? What's worked and what hasn't? And to answer that question, we've invited some of the world's leading voices, academic voices, dealing with organised crime and the use of the UNTOC and its protocols. However, before we turn to our experts, I'm delighted to first have the pleasure of giving the floor to the representative of the Permanent Mission of Angola here in Vienna, Ms. Arina Manso. She's the second secretary, and she'll be giving welcoming remarks on behalf of our ambassador, and then we will move to our technical experts. Arina?
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. Distinguished guests, esteemed delegates, I'm delighted to take part in this side event on behalf of the government of Angola and welcome you all to our side event. Your presence here today underscores our collective commitment to addressing the pressing issue of transnational organized crime in all its forms, including those that affect our wildlife and natural resources. I would like to start by thanking Permanent Mission of Peru, and particularly Ambassador Campana Boluart, for co-hosting this IT event with us, as well as the global initiative to end wildlife crime, Born Free Foundation, the Wildlife Justice Commission, and the Wildlife Conservation Society, for all their support in the organizing of today's discussion. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our expert panelists who have kindly agreed to share their knowledge and expertise with all of us today. Distinguished delegates, wildlife trafficking, including illegal fishing and logging, is one of the world's largest and most lucrative criminal activities. It affects more than just our biodiversity. It poses a risk to human and animal health. It frustrates our efforts to mitigate climate change and affects our local communities whose livelihoods depend on the legal and sustainable use of wildlife. Despite the destructive impact of wildlife trafficking on both people and nature, the international response to these crimes remains significantly lacking. According to the UNODC report presented this Wednesday, I was delighted to learn that 77 member states submitted their views throughout 2023, and that over half of them had a positive view of the protocol of the potential of an additional protocol. Distinguished guests, today's side event aims to enrich this ongoing discussion with fresh perspectives. Our esteemed panelists will delve into the key features of the three existing UNTOC protocols, reflecting on the lessons learned since their adoption and their consequential impact. This analysis will help highlight the benefits of a potential additional protocol and explore its possible content. We look forward to today's discussion and to continue to work with colleagues from all over the world to build momentum towards creating the best possible international legal framework to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking for the benefit of our people, our climate, and our biodiversity. Let's make our planet a better place to live. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mansell. Our first expert is going to join us via video message. It's Dr. Joseph Lelliot, and he's going to be talking about the current international legal framework to prevent and combat wildlife trafficking, to highlight existing instruments as well as some gaps in the existing international framework. A little bit about Dr. Lelliot. He's a senior lecturer in the Law School at the University of Queensland in Australia, where he teaches criminal law and international human rights law. He has particular expertise on the UNTOC and its protocols and has published widely on the topic. He also frequently serves as a consultant to UNODC on issues related to transnational organised crime.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Joseph Lelliot, and today I will be talking briefly about the current international legal framework concerning wildlife trafficking. I should apologise first of all that I can't be there in person. I am beaming this video around the world to you from Brisbane, Australia. Even so, I should stress that I am very pleased to be part of this side event and to be presenting as part of these important discussions. Before I go any further, I should say that in terms of the international legal framework, as many of you likely know, there is no single international instrument that either directly or indirectly addresses wildlife trafficking. This is despite the seriousness of the phenomenon, its scale, and the increasing attention given to it by governments and organizations around the world. What we do have is a patchwork of various multilateral treaties spanning aspects of international trade. That's principally regulated by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, or cited as short, environmental protection, and organised crime and corruption. While each of these instruments has some relevance to wildlife trafficking, there is nothing in them that directly requires criminalisation in national law. So, turning first of all to CITES. So, as the slide says, the Convention is the principal instrument addressing the trade in endangered species. It does so through a system of permits and certificates which serve to protect particular species listed in one of the Convention's, one of CITES' 3 appendices. Without going into a great amount of detail, the Convention does require states to prohibit trade that contravenes its various rules, and indeed it is currently the only instrument that mandates some form of penalisation of the illegal trade, but there is no requirement to make contraventions illegal or criminal as such. Furthermore, the Convention does not cover the majority of the world's animal and plant species. So as a UNODC toolkit observed in 2012, and you can see this quote there on the slide, CITES cannot credibly be extended into an agreement to suppress and control every aspect of illegal trade in wild fauna and flora. So turning now to environmental agreements. The 3 principal instruments addressing wildlife conservation broadly are the Convention on Biological Diversity, the World Heritage Convention, and the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Now, while these treaties play a role in combating wildlife trafficking insofar as they encourage the protection of diversity, heritage, and species, they do not contain any hard obligations in relation to it or its criminalisation. That brings me to the third part of the relevant international legal framework, and that comprises the transnational crime treaties. So the Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime, or UNTOC, and the Convention Against Corruption, or UNCAC. UNTOC lays out a comprehensive set of provisions addressing transnational organised crime, its definition of which could conceivably include wildlife trafficking. For several reasons, however, including first and foremost its application to only serious crimes with penalties greater than 4 years imprisonment, it falls short of clear and holistic application to wildlife trafficking. In addition, none of UNTOC's 3 protocols address the crime type. UNCAC, meanwhile, concerns corruption and sets out various criminalisation provisions which may be relevant to wildlife trafficking, but it is simply complementary in this regard. What this means in sum, then, is that we can identify 2 key limitations in the existing international legal framework relevant to wildlife trafficking. First, there is no legally binding and widely accepted definition of the crime type. And then secondly, there are no mandatory obligations to criminalise it. Though UNTOC comes closest in this respect, its application to wildlife trafficking is inconsistent. As a result, there is widespread agreement among experts that the current framework is inadequate in combating wildlife trafficking. In the absence of any comprehensive and directly relevant instrument, states need to resort to relevant provisions that are fragmented across various treaties. Okay, that brings me to the conclusion of this short talk and overview. I hope you all have a very enjoyable and fulfilling conclusion to your afternoons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lelliot. That was a very clear overview, which I think has set up this discussion extraordinarily well. Sorry about that echo we still get. I don't know where that's coming from. Next speaker we have is Professor Andreas Scholenhardt. He's a Professor of Criminal Law at the University of Queensland, Australia, and a Professor of Foreign and International Criminal Law at the University of Vienna. His principal areas of research include criminal law, organised crime, smuggling of migrants, trafficking in persons and wildlife trafficking, amongst many others. He's the author of many books and journals and articles, and his work is frequently cited by other scholars in government reports, judicial decisions, including the High Court of Australia and Supreme Court of Austria. Dr. Schloenhardt is going to be talking to us about the UNTOC. He'll provide an overview and provide insight into the 3 existing protocols. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for inviting me to speak at today's event, albeit with an echo. You've heard from the previous speakers a little bit about the significance of these proposals about an additional protocol, the context, and the gaps in the existing international framework. And in my short presentation, I perhaps want to reflect briefly on how this could fit and how it could operate in reality, which brings us to the UNTOC family of treaties. This family was born, if you like, in the late 1990s when the UN General Assembly decided to establish an ad hoc committee that would combine what was then 4 separate proposals to develop 4 treaties on transnational organized crime, which is often referred to as the parent treaty in this family, and its 3 supplementing protocols on smuggling of migrants, trafficking in firearms, and trafficking in persons. This initiative in late 1998, then 2 years later, led to the opening for signature of these 4 instruments in late 2000. This was developed by any standard in record time, and right from the start, the General Assembly set itself a very ambitious target to conclude these treaties within 2 years, which I think also speaks for the significance of the topics that they address. Each of these 4 instruments had their sponsors. The draft of UNTOC was initially written by the government of Poland and the United States in 2 separate proposals. The trafficking in persons protocol was drafted by Argentina and the United States. The smuggling of migrants protocol has its origin here in Vienna, but also some elements came from the Italian government, and the firearms protocol. The first draft was written by Canada, and much was drawn from the existing American Convention on firearms. So there was always some sort of sponsor behind, and as you hear from John, momentum I think is building up also for a range of government authorities to put their weight behind the proposal of a 4th protocol. This family of treaties, as many of you will know, is frequently referred to as the Palermo Convention and the protocols. And there is some small technical issues here. The treaty was opened in Palermo in December 2000 for signature, as were 2 of the protocols. The violence protocol followed a few months later. And I think if you have any doubt about the impact and significance of these treaties, it is quite remarkable how many states have signed them very quickly. I believe UNTOC was one of the most successful treaties to gain widespread momentum around the world. It has now 190 states parties. I think we can safely say this has universal application. The same almost applies for the trafficking in persons protocol with 108 state parties. Smuggling of migrants protocol with much support among some Asian countries with 152 state parties, and the firearms protocol, which Anna will talk in more detail about, has presently 123 state parties. So quite a success story in how this came about and how it was received by states around the world. Which begs the question, is there room for more? Because the system was set up right from the start that other protocols would follow. Now, it is a bit of a historical accident that it was trafficking in persons, smuggling of migrants, and trafficking in firearms that emerged at that time. Keep in mind that at the time that UNTOC was written, we had already a solid international framework surrounding offences related to drug trafficking. There have been several rather loose ideas about what other protocols might be suitable to join this family. but with the protocol against wildlife trafficking, this is probably the first most concrete and most advanced step to really add a fourth or perhaps additional protocols to that. Please don't get too hooked up on the terminologies I'm using on this slide. I'm an old man and I call it trafficking in fauna and flora. Other people call it wildlife trafficking, and there's again other terminology used in relation to wildlife crime, offences against the environment, and so on. These protocols, as their name suggests, supplement the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which, as this slide shows, and I won't go into details here, offers a very comprehensive suite of tools relating to criminal offences, to criminal justice processes, to international cooperation, and many other aspects. And, of course, it casts all of this as serious offences that have a connection to organized criminal groups. And these tools under the UNTOC are then available and applicable to the three protocols, and their offences, vice versa, offences under the convention. So this means any new protocol would automatically step into those shoes, that it would have access to all the range of mechanisms related to law enforcement, international cooperation, witness protection, and so forth. And also would get the support from the institutions that support UNTOC, chiefly UNTOC, the CCPCJ, the Conference of the Parties, and the review mechanism, which is now in its third year of operation. Based on the template that the existing three protocols already adopt, it is quite easy to foresee what kind of content would be covered in this protocol. This is not advocating any particular ideas, it's simply using the existing template and putting the wildlife trafficking topic around that. Following a preamble, there would be an initial part with general provisions setting out terminology, explaining the relationship to UNTOC as the other existing protocols too. This would presumably be followed with a chapter on criminalization. There's some debate, of course, here could be covered in this extension to criminal liability, confiscation, seizure, and disposal as well, which is important. Contraband that we are talking about. Prevention efforts clearly play an important role in the context of wildlife trafficking as well. And further provisions then relating to protection and conservation would be relevant when we talk about fauna and flora, special law enforcement and forensic mechanisms that might be needed, and then concluding with the final provisions. So this is really not reinventing the wheel, this is simply taking the established system and adopting it for crimes relating to wildlife trafficking. There are several quite advanced proposals on the table already. The Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime has drafted the content of a personal protocol, which is even more simple than the design that I have chosen here. The Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime has for quite some time advocated the idea as well, and many in the room will be aware that the Council of Europe in Strasbourg is in the final stages of completing a new convention on the protection of the environment through criminal law, which also contains multiple provisions that are directly relevant to wildlife trafficking, and from which this new initiative would draw some inspiration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Schloenhardt. That was a really clear and concise walk through the UNTOC and the protocols in a way I don't think we've seen previously. I'm delighted to invite our final speaker for today, someone who is very well known to this audience, and that is Dr. Ana Albazi del Frate, and she's going to talk about the impact of the firearms protocol, the good and the not so good, as it's also important to listen to some criticisms which can be useful in forming any future potential negotiations. Dr. Del Frate is the Executive Director of KENIS, which is Knowledge for Safety and Good Governance. She's a criminologist with vast experience in international studies on crime, violence, gender and firearms, developed over a long career at the UN and in academic and applied research. Many of you will also know her as former chair of the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Dr. Delfrate, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. And, well, I hope that the echo that prevails in this room, it will be possible to limit it, but anyway. So I prepared a slide that contains a lot of mistakes. I changed the name of the protocol to smuggling, and it said it's on trafficking, and I missed one of the parties. But anyway, I wanted to go back a bit to the history of the protocol that is slightly different from the other two protocols. We have already heard from Andreas quite a lot, but here there was a momentum in the late 90s that in particular here at the UN in Vienna was around the 1997 Canadian study on firearms. I see Eduardo Vettere nodding. He was leading the crime prevention and criminal justice program at that time. So that momentum led to the proposal for a protocol that was submitted by Japan and Canada in 1998. So basically this issue entered in the negotiations for the convention as a well-defined issue. But at the same time in New York, exactly at the same time, the negotiations started for the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons. That is not a legally binding instrument. So we have two parallel processes, very similar to some extent, but the protocol is framed under the convention, so connected to the issue of transnational organized crime, connected to the parent convention, of course. And it is interesting to take a look at what is happening in terms of their impact, let's say. Let's see if we try. Okay, so as I said, a legally binding instrument. So this is an important thing, but it also means that it has, in comparison to the other two protocols and the parent convention, a relatively low number of parties. It is something that is an impediment to universalization. Of course, the importance instead that we see is the alignment of definitions, the possibility to work towards domestic legislation that is consistent and coherent and avoiding loopholes. With the firearm protocol, unfortunately, we are not there yet, but the working group on firearms that meets every year represents a space where both parties and non-parties have the possibility to discuss things and advance in a sort of parallel world where being a party or not being a party is relatively I don't know if states may be contradicting, but it is a possibility to discuss certain issues in a shared context. Unfortunately, these working groups are not open to civil society, so I will not miss this opportunity to invite states to reconsider the possibility of civil society participating in working groups, because I think they are missing a bit from our expertise. From a study that we are conducting at CHEMIS together with the University of Milan and the Small Arms Survey, we have tried to take a look to see whether being a party to a legally binding instrument, and in particular having ratified it, if it makes a difference. So I will show you some preliminary results. Forgive me for the chart this time. But anyway, what does it show? This yellow bar shows that in 41 countries that ratified the protocol, so those who really ratified, not only agreeing, signing, but really ratifying the protocol, there was a more visible decrease of suicides committed with firearms over 10 years. over a period of 10 years. Can we say that this is really causality? No, we cannot, because there are too many intervening variables. But frankly, this is a very encouraging and interesting starting point. So it would indicate that ratification of a protocol may really commit states to do more to enact domestic legislation that is effective in the direction of limiting certain behaviors, certain behaviors that are criminalized, and obtaining the impacts that are desired. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we've now heard from our four speakers. We've heard about the high level support coming from Angola. The President of Angola expressed support for the protocol. The support also coming at presidential level from Costa Rica, Gabon and Malawi. We've heard about the level of interest from states following the submissions that came forward following Resolution 31.1, with over half of states being favourably disposed towards considering a protocol, some liking the idea of expanding its scope, further the existing framework through the multilateral environmental agreements, as well as the UN conventions on the transnational organised crime against corruption and the gaps that exist in that framework in relation to wildlife trafficking. A very interesting deep dive into the UNTOC and its protocols, how they evolved over the years, and a very important comment made that the system was established to enable additional protocols, and that's what we're exploring today. And we also look at what a protocol could potentially include based upon the previous protocols. And just to a deeper dive into the protocol on firearms trafficking, with some interesting statistics there, although the issue of causality remains open, some interesting statistics on the potential impact of that protocol. Everyone's been sticking to time. We got started on time, so we have a few minutes now where we can open it up for any comments or questions. If you'd like to make a comment or question, please identify yourself. And if you have a particular speaker you'd like to direct your question to, let us know. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the speeches and all the explanations of the necessity of an additional protocol. My question is, of course, it all depends on political will. And the first step countries should take, of course, because wildlife trafficking meets a lot of conditions. It is transnational in nature, it is organized most of the times, but the question is it a serious crime? That's available. The first step countries can take is to make it a serious crime. Do you have any idea how many countries fail that criteria? And so, how the political will of those countries is do something about wildlife trafficking. Thank you.
Did you identify yourself? Could you?
I'm sorry, yes, I'm from the Netherlands.
Thank you. We'll collect a few questions, if that's all right, if there's a few others. Yes?
Thank you for the interesting presentations. I'm Justin Roslin from the Environmental Investigation Agency in the UK. Maybe a follow-up to that one. The International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime was formed 14 years ago. And Mr. Scanlon, you were instrumental in developing that in general. There's two tools of that which are very useful. One is the wildlife and forest crime toolkit, and then the other is a set of indicators, 50 indicators, which looks really comprehensively at law enforcement, criminal justice, penalisation, and seriousness of crime. I wonder how many of the supporting countries, the idea of protocol, have volunteered to go through that process. Would that be useful for them to do so that we can understand the gaps a bit more comprehensively? I should acknowledge also that Professor Schleimer drafted the first ever version of the wildlife crime toolkit many years ago. And can I just sneak another quick one to him? If this is necessary, why don't all forms of serious crime? Thank you.
Thank you, and I can take one more before we, yes.
Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. So my name is Fabian Kister. I work for UNTOC on forensic technology. And I was wondering if there's any further statistical kind of numbers that actually really make an argument in favor of an additional protocol apart from statistics on suicide. I was just wondering if there are any additional numbers looking at homicide, for instance. Of course, there are many factors, but just looking at a different kind of argument, or if this is also something that maybe deserves further research. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Andres and Anna, I'll start with you, Andres, and then Anna, if I pick up the questions you'd like to, I'll also add some response from my perspective as well. Please do.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'll try to address them together a little bit. Some of the questions relate to the serious crime threshold, which UNTOC defines as offences that have a maximum penalty of 4 years imprisonment, which under most jurisdictions, very few offences meet that threshold. All offences, and in wildlife in particular. I think two things to say to that. First of all, of course, UNTOC can deal with offences that don't meet that threshold either. And we've seen that in the context of the existing crime types as well. I wouldn't advocate that everyone now bumps up the penalties just to kind of bring it in that scope. I don't think that is the desire behind that. But keep in mind, one thing that UNTOC does, it casts the organized crime lens over that. And I think the choice of terminology of wildlife trafficking is important. So this involves some sort of illicit trade of a particular scale that inherent in the word trafficking involves cross-border trade. So we're not dealing with, with a tourist who buys a small piece of trinket and brings a curio back to their country. We don't want to punish their people with 4 years imprisonment. So I think the upside and the downside of UNTOC is that it looks at organized crime only. The point has often been made in the context of smuggling of migrants. Why it has this organized crime lens? But it means we're looking at the sort of particular slice or the icing on the cake, and I think that justifies that. On the other question, why not all serious crime that was asked, and I think this goes to the question, what could be the scope of this protocol? I would call for modesty here. I think the more you open this up for a discussion about all types of wildlife crime or about all offences against the environment, I mean, I certainly, and many in the room will welcome that there is a renewed interest in these offences, pollution, waste trafficking, and so on, and all of them require our attention. But I think there's more to be gained by looking at these offences individually. Wildlife trafficking is one, illegal logging has many different other dimensions, and that's why I would think there's more to be gained by looking at these offences individually, and we can save that work for later. Thank you.
Yes, Anna, please.
Thank you. I would be happy to respond to this statistical question. So, thank you very much for asking. It is a fascinating study that we are trying to do. Of course, what I was showing you was the most, let's say, interesting slide, because it refers to suicides committed with firearms. We see very similar, almost the same pattern with homicides in general, not necessarily with firearms. Now, the problem is that you know very well that the basis of data may be uneven. So you may have poorer information on crimes committed with firearms with respect to homicides in general, that you have a better and more solid database. We are also thinking in our analysis that we should look at where states come from in terms of levels of violence, and there are also different reasons why states ratify a protocol. Some it is to solve a problem that is very serious with them, some is to maintain a good situation that they have. So the situation may be very different. So we are trying to take into account all these considerations. And obviously it is a matter of analyzing the data that exists in this framework. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Just picking up on a few issues, the issue of political will. If we go back in time a little bit, in 2014, Gabon and Germany set up a friends group in New York to look at the issue of wildlife trafficking, and that resulted in the first ever UN General Assembly resolution being adopted in 2015 on tackling wildlife trafficking. It included a particular provision on encouraging states to make wildlife trafficking in protected species a serious crime as defined under the UNTOC. There have been 5 subsequent resolutions adopted basically on a 2-year cycle, staying the same. And I think we're going to hear in the next session some statistics on the global analysis of crimes that affect the environment, how that has been reflected in national laws. So I'll save that for the next session, although it was referenced in the World Wildlife Crime Report that was released earlier this week. So we have seen that CITES doesn't oblige parties to criminalise, it obliges parties to penalise, and so that's why the UN General Assembly resolution is quite interesting. There are 1,400 multilateral environmental agreements, and of that 1,400 there is only one that obliges states to criminalise failure to comply with the convention. That's the Basel Convention. We'll hear more about that in the following session as well, which deals with waste. So I'd say there's a degree of political will there, but as we see from the World Wildlife Crime Report of 2024, while there's been some progress made, we're still a long way away from ending these crimes. On the issue raised about the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, we launched that in November 2010 in St. Petersburg at the Global Tiger Summit, and it was there the former Executive Director Yuri Fedotov and then President of the World Bank signed off, and we had previously had Interpol and the Customs Organisation sign off. It's been a highly successful consortium. It's an interagency consortium though. It's not a political platform. It is an operational platform where you bring all 5 agencies that have a particular interest in this together so that they're not tripping over each other. They're working in a collaborative way. So a highly successful initiative, and it goes from strength to strength. As said, Justin, it has some very good tools, not just the toolkit on wildlife and forest crime. It has a set of indicators. Exactly how many have used that, we can interrogate the website for ICRIC, also the CITES website. I don't know off the top of my head, but there has been good pick-up of that. And again, these UN General Assembly resolutions encourage parties to make use of that. So, we see progress, but as was pointed out by the first speaker and subsequent speakers, there remain gaps. There is no particular instrument that addresses this. We have no agreed definition despite all of this effort, and hence this conversation. And in terms of the political will, we have had 4 presidents, 2 are no longer president, but we had the former president of Costa Rica and Gabon make very strong statement in support. We have the current president of Angola and of Malawi have made very strong calls for support. And the resolution 31.1 was the first time ever in the UN system there was any reference to exploring the international legal framework on whether an additional protocol was going to be beneficial. And we've heard the results already earlier this week from UNODC. Over 50% of the 70 plus states responding were favourably disposed. But there was the discussion around should the scope be expanded, and if so, in what way. So we'll open it up for a second round of questions. If anyone else would like to make a comment or take the floor. Ambassador?
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. And obviously, the Ambassador of Europe here. We are following very closely the debate regarding the implementation of the working to promote fourth additional protocol under the UNTOC. In the case of Paraguay, it's another country. We have a lot of
natural resources, we're negative mega biodiverse country that we have a lot of biodiversity, a lot of wildlife, and also as we have a lot of waterways as well as roads that connect different borders, and these borders also link the Pacific Ocean with the Atlantic Ocean. We have a lot of traffic, any kind of traffic, and we are also being affected by illegal wildlife traffic. As I mentioned before, we have followed the debate on broadening the focus of including other environmental crimes. This is what mentioned by Professor Sriram Hart. This is a very good, strong argument in favor of one specific protocol for combating wildlife trafficking. How do you see, how do you see, or where do you see the obstacles in the bottlenecks to move forward and to table and to present a proposal in this sense? What are the bottlenecks and obstacles? And also one more question regarding the impact of the zoonosis. And this issue was also discussed in Geneva at the WHO. And can you tell us a little bit more in this forum about the impact on zoonosis of illicit trafficking? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I know that we're going to have to set up for the next session. I think if it can be short, we'll take one from you, and then we'll allow our colleagues that will answer the Ambassador's question. Annie?
It's not a question, it's just a quick comment. Given the question about the indicator or the aspect of framework, I can give you an answer on that. Basically, 30 from 31 member states that have implemented either the tutorial framework or we have not been matched. These which ones are have responded yes or no because we don't have that information. But I'm happy to share the information of which of the items so that somebody can demand.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. I'm going to take two more interventions, colleague from Brazil and then Tito.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, Professor Sean, you have mentioned there will be different ideas and views about the school. I'd like to hear if you talk about between what advantage would we have by having one protocol encompassing all flora and fauna, or possibly having installment and log separately could stand the benefit of the machine. Thank you.
And final comment, and then we'll take 1 minute from the panel and we'll let our colleagues set up the next session.
Thank you. The UNTOC, we're facing the same challenges that Hannah described in terms of trying to actually measure the impacts as opposed to the implementation in terms of ratification of this convention. And one of the difficulties that we have is that the review mechanism of the UNTOC is not essentially what's working. No country abuse has been published more than 4 years after it started. We have no idea when the first one will come. And you have to get 70% of each group of countries to move to the next phase. I don't know how we propose to address this.
Good point.
Thank you for that. Yes, so we'll go down the panel. Quick response to all of the questions and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you very much. I think the two questions from Paraguay and Brazil fit together a little bit. What are the bottlenecks? I think one is deciding on the exact scope of such an instrument. And as I said before, I would urge for modesty here. If we bring in other topics such as legal law, as you mentioned, I think there's other stakeholders and industries that become relevant, which have particular voices and interests. And I think that would muddy the waters a little bit, and I think it would be safer to separate them. If we think of pollution, crime, waste trafficking, and so on, then there's more and more stakeholders, and reconciling those opinions will be very, very challenging. So that's why I think less is more. I think the other big bottleneck, but this is my very personal opinion, we didn't script this event today, is I think striking the right balance between the onus on source countries and destination countries. Wildlife trafficking is a demand-driven crime, and there's a history in international criminal law that much of the onus is also always on the source countries. And I think there needs to be a right balance between responsibilities as to where these things are sourced and where they are sold eventually. And I think that might be a challenging discussion to be had amongst member states.
Thinking what I could add, because indeed adding a protocol, of course, it is additional work that would fall under the same mechanism. It is important, nevertheless, to see that the areas of specialization may be working separately. I would say that for the protocols, it is true that the review mechanism is going slow, but let's say the wealth of knowledge that has advanced in working around these protocols may, let's say, justify a separate mechanism in a way. So it is now what we see is that the convention is an umbrella, and the pillars now are represented by the different protocols. So especially now with the review mechanism, it's going to be interesting what states will be reporting separately for the protocols with respect to the convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just very briefly before we wrap up, Ambassador Cassetti, the issue of zoonosis is a very important one. As you know, you can have spillover of certain pathogens from wild animals to people, can lead to a pandemic. One of the risks you face with illegal trafficking of wild animals is that they don't go through any quarantine checks, no biosecurity, and so there's a risk of spillover of the pathogen. So that's another reason why it's important to focus attention here. Just in terms of this issue of balance, which I think is a really important one, one of the things we've been talking of is that if any country chooses to protect its wildlife, whether it's endangered or not, that should be protected by destination countries. At the moment, what we see too often is that if it's not CITES listed, it goes straight through customs because it's not protected under international law, but it's protected under national law. If we think in the principle of comity, there should be respect for the national laws. It should be an offence at the destination country to allow any wildlife, wild animal, wild plant, fungi, into the country if it was not required in accordance with national laws. You could say the same for genetic resources as well, if we want to expand scope. In terms of scope, slightly different position. We would like to see all wildlife, that's all wild fauna, flora and fungi, that's fungi, addressed under a protocol, because the role of a fish, the role of a tree, the role of an elephant, they all have a role in the ecosystem, and we don't see the logic in disaggregating it if we can aggregate it. So that would be where we would prefer to see it. So with that, I know our colleagues are going to set up now for the next session. Please do stay for the next session, it'll be great, on the global analysis of crimes that affect the environment. Express a huge thanks to Angola and Peru for sponsoring, all our co-sponsors, but in particular all of our speakers today and all of you for joining us Friday afternoon. Thank you.